So tell us a little bit about universal basic income.
Sure.
Go deeper. You gave us sort of a teaser in your talk. Why? Why did you come to that? How did you come to that? And why does it matter?
Yes. So how many of you know a lot about universal basic income? Raise your hand if you know a lot. All right, most of you don't know anything. So about universal basic income. So when I was reading various books about the future of work, automation, technology, a lot of them landed on universal basic income as a recommendation. And so I started digging into the history, and it turns out that this is an idea where everyone gets a certain amount of money, free and clear, no questions asked to meet your basic needs. So my plan, the freedom dividend, would give every American adult starting at age 18 $1,000 a month to do whatever you want. So you're all, I think, 18 or over. So you'd all just be getting $1,000 a month, and you would just be, in many of your cases, you'd just be applying it to school. But if you weren't here at Georgetown, you would still be getting the money, and you could do whatever you want. So this is an idea that was with the founding fathers. Thomas Paine was for it. He called it the citizen's dividend. Martin Luther King championed this as a guaranteed minimum income the year before he was killed. And then in the 70s, Milton Friedman and 1,000 economists championed this idea, so much so that Richard Nixon passed it, or it passed the House of Representatives twice under Nixon in 1971. And there's one state today where they did pass a dividend where everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year. And what state is that?
Alaska.
And how do they fund it?
Oil.
And what is the oil of the 21st century? Technology. And so what they're doing for Alaska with oil money, we're going to do for the rest of the country with technology money. They call it the oil check in Alaska. We're going to call this the tech check, and everyone's going to love the tech check.
If you're a student at Georgetown, why does this matter to you right now?
Well, if you're a student at Georgetown, you're mostly just stressed out about like what your summer internship's going to be, what your job after graduation is going to be. And I would suggest that even for you all, even though many of you are from like very, very strong backgrounds, $1,000 a month would actually be a difference maker for you too. Where if you were coming out of school, it'd be like, hey, if I had $1,000 a month, maybe it'd be more realistic for me to take that creative job or do something a little bit off the beaten path. And so if we had that freedom dividend in place, and if you're a freshman or sophomore here, if I become president, I'm going to try and make this real for you by the time you graduate. But your options do get increasingly constrained. And the perversion is that in some ways, the better you do in our meritocracy, the more you feel like you don't have a choice.
Go deeper on that one. What do you mean by that?
Well, I went to Exeter and Brown and Columbia for law school, and my friends and I did the same things in the same places. And then when I became an entrepreneur and started this failed company, my friends were advancing at these law firms. They're doing better and better, and they had fancy parties and birthday dinners I couldn't afford to go to, and it made me feel very, very small and bad about myself. So, I mean, it's just human nature. I mean, it's fine, whatever. So that's what I mean is that you naturally end up comparing yourself to a very rarefied peer group, and then you feel like you have to keep up with the Joneses.
And so you've been going around the country. I've heard a lot of your talks about universal basic income and running for president. A large part of this is really you're pushing this narrative, this question of what's going to happen to jobs in the future. What's been the reaction?
In Iowa and New Hampshire and places like that, they get it like this. Because if you're in a rural part of this country, you're just seeing the vitality leave, the people leave. You don't have any meaningful paths forward. Schools are consolidating because there's not enough kids. And so if I go there and I say, hey, have you noticed stores closing? They're like, heck yes. And many of you probably did not live in manufacturing communities, but Iowa was a manufacturing community and lost 40,000 manufacturing jobs. So if you say to them, do you know manufacturing workers that lost their jobs? They're like, heck yes. The biggest truck stop in the country is in Iowa 80, in Davenport, Iowa. So you say, hey, do you know truck drivers? Everyone knows truck drivers because it's a massive trucking hub. So one of the things that we've found on the campaign trail is that the people that are closest to the scene understand it like that. This is one reason why I'm going to shock the world coming up, because you'll see I have outsized strength in Iowa and New Hampshire, and that right now, I'm already polling at 1% right now, and most people have never heard of Andrew Yang. But I'm going to make the debate stage in June, And then because most Americans who are actually living the economy I'm describing understand that what I'm saying is 100% right, it's a very, very powerful message. If anything, the message is trickier in places where they're not experiencing the same ways.
So I'm one of those economists you're making fun of. Economics would say, why doesn't labor move to where the jobs are?
So I'm a numbers guy, and the rate of interstate migration right now in the United States of America is a multi-decade low. People aren't even moving across state lines as much as they did in past eras. And given the dynamism of the economy, you'd hope for the opposite. So if you actually go to these areas and say, hey, why is no one moving? Underwater in their mortgage, they have family members there. Like, it's actually very hard to move. And if you don't have savings, it's even harder to move. Moving for a new job requires a level of resources and confidence and optimism. And that is missing from many, many Americans at this point.
So how do we, who are sitting sometimes in Washington, D.C., or some of these cities like San Francisco, Chicago, New York, think about what's happening with the rest of the country?
Well, it's been really interesting, Sonal, because I presented facts. Like I spoke at a conference of 70 CEOs, and I actually have a fancy slide deck with like all of this data, just saying like, here it is, and people see it, and it's hard for people to understand the data in many ways. Like one data point I present is that 40% of American children are born to an unmarried mother now, and that's unusual in the experience of most of the CEOs in that room because everyone around them like lives in a two-parent household type of environment. And so the translation of the experience to people who live in prosperous coastal areas, it's not easy. It's like if I knew a better way to do that, I'd be conveying it more impactfully.
And as you think about kind of what propelled you to run for president? You gave us a little bit of a teaser again, but running for president is not a small thing. You kind of went in from running a successful company after the failure to starting VFA to then saying, I'm going to run for president because I can make this change happen. Why?
Well, there are two attitudes in life. I found one to be more accurate. So the first attitude is someone else will take care of this. And the second is I'm going to have to take care of this. And I've actually met many of the other people who are running for president, and many of them are very fine individuals. Many of them are patriots, they're earnest public servants, but most of them have very, very limited exposure to technology and its intersection with the workforce. And many of them, unfortunately, have only a foggy sense of how the economy functions, in my experience. And it's not a knock on them. It's like if you've been in certain environments for a couple of decades, or you were born in the 1940s, no offense to anyone, but if you were born in the 1940s, some of these issues are not going to be things that you naturally understand. And so I saw the landscape and I said, this problem is definitely not going to get addressed in the right time frame if I don't do something about it. And so I drew up the various paths and what my risk reward was. And I said, okay, if I put my heart and soul into this, I think I can accelerate the eradication of poverty and meaningful solutions to what I see as systemic threats and failures. So if you don't make that move and you think you have a legitimate chance to do that much good, then you have a very, very limited sense of yourself and morality.
So there are, at least from what I can count, 10 candidates in the race right now on the Democratic side. How does Andrew Yang stand out?
Well, the first thing is that, I'm suggesting I'm going to get $1,000 a month, which, people tend to, that gets their wheels turning. It's somewhat polarizing, but then when people dig into it, a lot of people are like, wow, that would actually be a huge difference maker for me. The other thing that seems to be happening, I did not realize it was this severe, but just the fact that I'm talking about numbers and policy is actually vastly different from most other politicians. So when I address a group of 200, 700 Iowans, they come up to me afterwards and say, you don't sound like any politician I've heard. And then that gets me a really enthusiastic 10 to 15%, which in a very crowded field is enough for me to compete at the highest levels.
So some of the other pieces that you talked about was big M market.
Yes.
And you have policies that you think about in terms of the big end market, not just universal basic income, but you're thinking about how to think about the market differently. Give us a few of those ideas.
Sure. So our political system at this point has been captured by huge corporate interests and moneyed interests. So the way you counteract that is you give every citizen 100 democracy dollars that can only be donated to a political campaign. And that would wash out the corporate money because $100 times even a minority of citizens is a much higher sum than all of the money that's being spent on lobbyists and the rest of it. So that one move ends up recapturing democracy and making it so that if someone like me appeals to 10,000 people, I get $1 million. Whereas right now, I have to appeal to 10,000 people and then go get the $1 million from some rich people. I mean, it's the real process. So if you can actually unify the money and the people, then you can fix democracy. You know, it's not that hard. The problem is going to be getting that passed because the corporate interests have spent billions of dollars locking up the system to their own benefit.
So 100 democracy dollars.
Per American adult per year, and that would do the trick.
So every 18-year-old who can vote would get 100 democracy dollars?
Yes, and then if you don't use it, you lose it, so it doesn't stack. So then towards the end of the year, all these politicians would be like, hey, like give to my campaign, and then you'd be like, let's choose someone good. But that would still be an enormous victory. I would ban robocalling because, like, how are we getting harassed by robocalls? And in like this day and age, like I used to like it when my phone rang. Now it's like, getting harassed. I would pay NCAA athletes because it's immoral that we have institutions benefiting the tune of millions of dollars and then say like, oh, you're getting an education. And then literally they're like video games with their face on it and they're scrounging for meal money. Like that's not cool. So there are a lot of things we can do that would right the wrongs that we can all see. And one of my friends, Eric Weinstein, said two things. First, he said that we never knew that capitalism was going to get eaten by its son, technology. Which is where we are now. But the second thing he said is that this economy is making liars of us all because you go around selling this growth model and then you tell people, frankly, people like you, it's like, hey, join me and then the growth model will be yours and the riches will be yours. But the growth model is breaking down right and left and no one's telling you this. It's true, one example is academia. It used to be that you'd get a PhD and then you'd like try and become a tenure track professor. And then now you're just in this postdoc purgatory. You're never going to be made a professor, and they're just going to keep you around for cheap labor forever. So they're making liars of these institutions. They're making liars of the law schools who are like, come on in, you'll have a secure career, and it turns out you won't. So there are things going on right now that are actually corruptive because it's in everyone's interest to keep the lies going.
All right, guys, there's 2 mics up here. We're going to go to questions in just a second. So, well, there you go. I'm not even going to continue the questions because you have a line ready to go.
Sure.
Please, I'm going to ask one more question, but please keep your question to a question, which would be great. If you were going to make a comment, make it quickly, but ask a question. It needs to end with a question mark.
That man has my first book. I already like him. I'm going to sign that thing, brother. Yes.
So go ahead, please, and your name and what year you are would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Tim Palmieri. I'm a freshman in the business school, and I did read your book in one of our first year seminars. And I have a super quick question. How are we going to pay for the $1,000 a year, or like where does that come from? Sure.
All right, so the headline cost of $1,000 a month for every adult in the country is $3 trillion a year. For context, the economy is $20 trillion, up $5 trillion in the last 12 years, and the federal budget's around $4 trillion. So $3 trillion sounds massive. But if you look at our current welfare spending, we spend, as you know, Sonal, a majority of the federal budget on 126 welfare programs and Social Security. Now, the plan is to make the freedom dividend opt-in, so we don't want to hurt anyone. That people are relying on programs, excuse me. But if you opt in, you forego other benefits. And so it brings the cost down very, very fast because there are many Americans who are already getting more than $1,000 who then say pass on the freedom dividend, or they're getting $700, so it costs $300 if they opt in. So the real ticket is about $1.8 trillion. Still a lot of money. Now, the big change we need to make, who are going to be the winners from artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, robots, and the rest of it? The biggest tech companies, Amazon, Google, Facebook. And the trap we're in as a country is that those companies are great at not paying a lot of taxes. How many of you saw that Amazon paid no taxes last year despite having record profits? Netflix, same thing. Our income tax system is very, very poorly designed to capture revenue from multinational tech corporations. So what we have to do is we have to join every other industrialized economy in the world and implement a value-added tax that would give the American public a sliver of every Amazon transaction, every Google search, every robot truck mile. And because our economy is so vast now at $20 trillion, a value-added tax at even half the European level generates about $800 billion in new revenue. Now, this is when the magic happens. In a country where no one can pay their bills, what are they going to do with $1,000 a month if you put it in their hands? They're going to spend it. They're going to spend it on tutoring and food for their kids, the occasional night out, car repairs they've been putting off at the local hardware store, and that money is going to circulate into the economy. It's going to grow the consumer economy by 8 to 10%. It's going to create 2 million new jobs, and then we get back about $400 billion of that value in new tax receipts, because that's what happens when the economy grows. We're going to save 100 to 200 billion on things like incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room healthcare, and then we're going to be investing over $1 trillion in making our children and people healthier, better nourished, better educated, mentally healthier. And at least one study showed that it would increase GDP by $700 billion if we eradicated poverty in this country. So you end up getting back about $1 trillion in a combination of economic growth, cost savings, and value gains by having a stronger, healthier population. I've been the CEO of several organizations, and CEOs say all the time, we need to invest in our people, we need to invest in our people. In the public sector, we have the opposite standpoint. We're like, don't invest in anyone. Like, just try and spend as little as possible. And then we end up paying for it on the back end anyway because they hit our institutions in much more costly and destructive ways. A corrections officer in New Hampshire said to me, we should pay people to stay out of jail because when they're in jail, we just spend much, much more. So this is a new way to help build a trickle-up economy from human beings and families and communities up that would actually work. But the way you pay for this is you need a new value-added tax that harnesses the gains from innovation and new technology.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. It's a good question. I got you.
Sorry, I think, yeah. My name is Jessie Yu. I'm a senior in the college studying government. I was wondering how you think your identity as an Asian American is going to play into this election, especially as you said before, our country is only getting more racist and xenophobic. And I know you're Taiwanese American, but also like our relations with China are not great right now. So how do you think that'll affect the election and also in the future, your role in foreign diplomacy?
Sure. So I'm a very proud Asian American. I'm the first Asian American man to run for president as a Democrat in the nation's history. And Asian Americans are about 5.6% of the US. So if Asian Americans are excited about me, that would actually be a very, very nice jumping off point. So in the early states, my race has been a non-factor, in part because Iowa is 94% white, New Hampshire is 92% white. And when you're in that homogeneous an environment, there's no racial animus or hostility because they're just used to everyone being the same. And so you show up there like, hey, like, you look a little different, but I'm just going to talk to you like the exact same way I talk to everyone else because I only know one way to operate. And then, and I've known this because like I've been working in the Midwest and the South for 7 years, so like this is not surprising. Now, in other parts of the country, it's been something of an asset because there are people that are very excited about my candidacy. So I'm proud to be in this role. In terms of foreign diplomacy, I will say that right now China is being cast as the #1 antagonist or boogeyman to the US. And that's actually very, very bad over time because there's something of a natural propensity for the US to see someone else winning as the US losing. It's like a zero-sum game. Like if China gets richer and more influential, then it's like somehow really disastrous for the US. And that would put us on something of a Cold War collision course with China. And so one, which I think must be avoided at all costs. So, I mean, there are legitimate concerns. Like China's ripping off our intellectual property is like a really consistent problem, and that has massive economic repercussions. But one of the byproducts of my candidacy, I believe, is that I can help champion the notion that Asian Americans are Americans, that we're just as Americans as anyone else, and two, that China rising does not need to mean that the U.S. is losing.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Mr. Yang, thank you for coming to Georgetown. My name is Ben Weinberg. I'm a first-year graduate student at our School of Foreign Service. I'm also an aspiring entrepreneur, so I appreciate your perspectives. My question is about the building blocks of American society and the neglected state of them, such as education, healthcare, and our infrastructure. How do you see the future of the job market in these three sectors, which are likely to continue to grow, and how do we place Americans to handle these priorities as president?
Yeah, so the career advice many people have gotten around the country for the last number of decades is go into education and healthcare because they'll always be secure. And we are spending a lot of money in both those spaces. And this is something else, man, I seem so negative. I don't mean to be negative. I'm actually quite uplifting. I'm a very, very, uplifting man. But our educational institutions have started to become a little bit excessive in some respects and then deficient in others. And so I think that ideally, people would be able to work in education and healthcare and infrastructure and have very, very positive, long, fruitful, impactful careers in each of those areas. In practice, I think it's become a little bit, frankly, market-dominated in certainly education and healthcare, where college has gotten 2.5 times more expensive since I was in college, and it has not improved 2.5 times, as far as we can tell. And you all know, it's like, how much does it cost to go here now?
60,000
Yeah, it's like 60,000 a year.
for graduate school. Yeah,
Yeah. Then we wonder why you need to make money when you come out. So
of course.
it's so if everyone was getting $1,000 a year, that would be helpful. But I would also forgive a significant proportion of student loan debt and package it as an educational stimulus or an economic stimulus. Because right now, young people are just spending all of their energy servicing a debt load instead of starting families, buying homes, starting businesses like you'd like to do. Mm-hmm. And I owed $100,000 in law school debt myself. I used to call it my mistress because I was like writing a check to some town, being like, I hope my other family is doing well. And so I get that it constrains choices. So I'd try and get that monkey off your backs and then put you in a position to actually do more of what you'd like to do. Healthcare is its own thing. We're spending twice as much as other societies to worse results. So I'd move towards single-payer healthcare. It's the only way to get costs down and broaden access. That's going to mean that a lot of people who are profiteering in the healthcare industry are not going to make as much money. A lot of private health insurance plans should not exist, if you had a robust public option. And so so that's what I mean where there are like excess and deficiencies in each of these areas. But I have many good friends who've built great careers in both of those areas. So that's a bit of a twisted answer.
Sorry, in infrastructure, like increased spending?
Oh yeah, I'm all for spending over $1 trillion on infrastructure. We've let it fall into disrepair in a way that's literally dangerous now. And so I would invest multiple trillions of dollars. It's going to create many, many jobs. We have to make it more resilient and economically sustainable. We have to make it actually resistant to climate change. It would create many, many jobs and opportunities. It would increase economic productivity. So if you get me into office and you want to work in infrastructure, that'd be a great path because then I'm just going to write massive checks to it. And this is one thing I cannot believe Donald Trump didn't do. I was like, if this man does one thing right, it's going to be infrastructure. And he still didn't do it. He could have put his name on it even. You know what I mean? There could be like a Trump, it would be sort of psychologically damaging to be driving over Trump Bridge everywhere you go. But it would have been worth it just to have the damn bridges built.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Zach Levin. I'm a freshman in the School of Foreign Service. So during your speech, you sort of painted this picture of this automated world where repetitive cognitive and physical labor is done by robots. So in this future, how are we going to provide jobs for the people who used to be a part of that repetitive labor?
Yeah, that's a fundamental question. And it's particularly vital for men, because it turns out that men deal with idleness worse than women. Women find awesome things to do, and all is well. Not for everyone, but at a much higher rate. Men disintegrate. Men spend 75% of their time on computers playing video games and other things. They volunteer less than employed men, even though they have more time. Their alcohol and drug consumption goes up, and then they tend to spiral downwards into various antisocial behaviors. So the challenge really is to reconstitute paths of structure, purpose, and fulfillment for hundreds of thousands of American men who are going to see their jobs get automated away. And that is the challenge of this time. So there's no easy answer, but I would suggest that if you put $1,000 a month into people's hands, one, at least they feel like they're going to survive, but two, it also strengthens nonprofits and churches and NGOs and organizations in these communities that are going to try and create meaningful opportunities and supports for more and more people. And many of these men also, and I don't want to just make it men because it's everyone, but if you have children too, knowing that when they turn 18, they're getting $1,000 a month is a huge burden that would be lifted.
Thank you.
But it's a fundamental challenge, no easy answer. It's going to be like on for a long time.
Hi, my name is Simon. I'm a proud 2015 Venture for America fellow.
What's going on, Simon? I thought that was you.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
I thought there can't be two people that good looking.
So now I'm here at Georgetown. I'm doing my MBA, and I'm in the School of Foreign Service, pursuing a master's as well. And I have a foreign policy question for you. So I'm wondering, since you're running for president, what do you think the appropriate role for the United States is in the global arena?
Yeah, so I think our strength abroad reflects how we're doing here. And so we're not doing very well here. Again, life expectancy declined for 3 years, record drug overdoses and suicides, record mental health problems, anxiety and depression. And so we're getting increasingly erratic and unreliable abroad because Donald Trump's like, I don't care what the agreement was, or I'm just going to go in this direction. So job one is to try and reconstitute how we're doing here. And then abroad, I would want to build robust relationships and partnerships, because I think the US has gotten itself into trouble by trying to take on too much and doing things that we're not capable of, committing forces with unclear goals and unclear timeframes. And so my policies would be all about restraint and judgment. And if we do go into harm's way, then there has to be a clear set of goals and a clear timeline. That gives you a sense of where Andrew Yang would be on foreign policy. The goal is to take our commitments very, very seriously, and if we're going to do something, do it right, but don't do things that we can't really do.
Thanks.
Hi, my name's Rebecca Hollister, and I'm a sophomore in the college, undergrad. And I'm from Leavenworth, Kansas, so a lot of what you said really rang true. But I'm also chair of College Democrats here, and many of our members are aspiring people who want to run for office. So what are the best and worst parts of running for president?
I have to say, I feel so lucky to be running for president, and and it's even working. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there was a chance it wasn't going to work, but it's working great. Raising hundreds of thousands of dollars from tens of thousands of donors around the country. And I'm going to make that debate in June, because the criteria is either poll at 1%, which I'm already doing, or get 65,000 individual donations, which I'm on track to do. So if you'd like to help get me on a debate stage, just donate $1 or more at yang2020.com, and then you can say I was a part of getting that guy on that stage. So one reason I feel very lucky is because running for local office is much harder than running for president, it turns out. Because when you run for local office, everyone expects you to be at everything. If it's happening, then they're like, why aren't you here? And then if you're conscientious and want to win, then you will be there. And so you really end up losing any control of your schedule. So I would say that's something I've seen with local candidates consistently, where they just have to give up their cells and their schedule for an extended period of time. The best thing I would say is that you genuinely meet awesome people. Like, you meet the best people, in many cases, in a community that are actually aligned with your values, and that's extraordinarily invigorating and empowering. Like, you just build very intense, real relationships because you're trying to do something important, and the best people will gravitate to that.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Grant Marthinson, and I'm a first-year student in the Arab Studies program in SFS. And first of all, thank you for being here with us tonight. And my question is, what do you think the greatest foreign policy challenge or threat facing the United States is, excepting climate change?
Yes. I think it is managing China's relative rise in a collaborative, cooperative way. So one thing that's going to make that more difficult is this AI arms race that is taking place between the two countries. And China is set to leapfrog the US in AI because they have access to more data, and data is like food for AI. So they have more data and more computing resources because the Chinese government's essentially like blank check for computing resources. I was with the leaders in Silicon Valley, and they were like, we're going to spend $5 billion on computing resources, and China's going to multiply that many times over, and it's very hard for us to compete. So I've said to the people in Silicon Valley, when I'm president, I will match China's resources and get us back to that level, not to try and quote unquote beat China, but just to make sure we can maintain a collaborative relationship, because it's much easier to collaborate if you're one of the leaders. So I think that that relationship is the most important issue moving forward, aside from climate change, which surpasses everything else in its relative importance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Allison, and I'm a senior in the MSB. So you kind of pointed out the distributional problem caused by like the rise of AI and like tech conglomerate, but I was wondering how, in terms of your proposal to redistributing wealth, that you're assuming people is gonna use this $1,000 efficiently while they're just getting this with no hard work. So I was wondering why that would be a good solution.
Well, I certainly don't assume that everyone's going to use it in my idea of efficiency. You know, fundamentally, all citizens are owners and shareholders of the society, so it is their wealth. And so if they're going to make a determination that the ideal use of it is like a night at Chuck E. Cheese's or like, you know, something, and I'm not a fan of Chuck E. Cheese, maybe it makes me a monster. You know, like that is almost by definition efficient because that's what they're choosing to do. Now, if there are certain things they could choose to do that we could agree are really counterproductive and antisocial, but we're a nation of laws, and if people do something that's truly destructive, that's you know, puts others in harm's way, then there's still the same system that there is right now. And if anything, the incentive to stay out of jail would be much higher, because if you go to jail, then the freedom dividend goes towards your incarceration and you lose it. And then who would want that? Like, who wants to be like, oh man, like my $1,000 a month's going to like these freaking, you know, like prison guards I don't like. So, but the net answer really is that like efficiency would be in the eye of the beholder as long as people don't break laws.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Adam. I'm a freshman here in the college, and I have just a quick question. You mentioned before the cultural significance that people in our country, mainly men, place on having a job. So why not institute a job guarantee or a robot tax rather than universal basic income?
Yes. So robot tax is hard to administer because it's hard to tell what's a robot. Like if CVS replaces a cashier with an iPad, are you like going to tax that? And then at CVS, like, can I afford like a robust tax? It's very hard to get that up to a meaningful enough level where it's going to pay for some of these solutions. The issue with the jobs guarantee, I endorse the spirit of a jobs guarantee, because if someone wants to work and then finding work is a problem, then we can address that. That would be great. But the employer, government as an employer of hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans, has real problems in implementation. You know, studies have shown that in past programs, people who've been in that sort of government jobs program have been unable to transition to private employment because private employers don't regard that experience as valuable. And then if you have something as basic as like, I don't like my job, I don't like my boss, like my, you know, I want to make a change, but you're literally relying upon that job for your very survival, then it's extraordinarily difficult to iron out even basic issues. And then you have a government bureaucrat essentially making those decisions, being like, I have 10,000 workers, like these 300 like really don't like their jobs. And then it's like, okay, then what do I do with those 300 in this world where the government is the employer of such a significant proportion of people? So I understand the spirit of it, but I think in practice it would be deeply problematic, and we are much better off just putting economic value into people's hands and then letting people create jobs and determine their own sense of values. Because with this sort of money in people's hands, you would see a whole rise of what I call artisanal plus opportunities. How many Americans would prefer to do something creative or artistic or coaching in their community or journalism or something that right now the market won't support, that would make those sorts of choices with this kind of economic freedom in their hands? So understand the spirit of the jobs guarantee, but I think in practice, a dividend would be vastly superior.
Thank you.
Hi, Ginzorg Bappold. I'm senior studying physics and computer science and actually an incoming VFA fellow.
Nice. Well done, man. That makes me so happy.
So I was wondering if you could go further into how we would have to rethink the way the economy works, because your answer earlier with $100 for every citizen kind of sounds to me as a tech person as a way to stifle innovation in tech, because people would invest that money into candidates who would rather help the local economy rather than how tech would affect the whole country.
Yeah. I wouldn't see democracy dollars as somehow anti-innovation, hopefully. It's a fairly stark depiction of what people would want. I think that right now tech is at a very, very important juncture where it went from being that technology is an absolute good and progress is good and it can do no wrong, and then now that's being very much called into question by a lot of people in places like Georgetown, where they're like, wait a minute, like is Facebook like an absolute good? Like is Amazon an absolute good? I love it, I use it. Maybe you don't even love or use Facebook anymore, I don't know. But and so the threshold question in my mind in terms of democracy and tech is, how can tech be an unambiguous force for good and progress such that Americans would be really, really excited about it again? And that should be a challenge that tech leaders accept and embrace moving forward. So hopefully we can make it so those two things are not at odds. But if you're going to function in a democracy, I do think you have to try and win more people over to the fact that progress is good for them, not just good for certain people in certain places. And congrats on joining VFA, man. Do you know where you're going?
No, not yet. The process starts in probably a month or so.
Yeah, okay, well enjoy this time. You're gonna have a great time, man.
All right, thank
You're
you.
gonna have a great time. Thank you. Look at that.
So before you go, can I ask you a follow-up question on that, which is, when you think about sort of the tech companies, the value model for them is selling your data.
Yeah.
And what's the business model? Because if the continuous business model is I give you a free service in order to get your data, we're just basically giving away information about ourselves, which eventually is becoming AI anyway.
That's true. That's very true, Sonal. So I'm for having your information be a property right, where if someone else is profiting from it, you should get a cut. And if someone else is using it, then you should know about it, and you should have a dial. If you say maximal convenience and maximal revenue for me, then they can use your data however they want, as long as they cut you a check every so often. If you say, hey, I don't want you to use my data for stuff, then they shouldn't be using it, even anonymously. Now, there are many companies that this would be very, very problematic to their revenue models. But that, to me, again, is a challenge that they need to overcome. It's right. The value of our data actually can be really, really high. Like in some contexts, it's worth thousands and thousands of dollars, and we're not seeing any of that. But I will say that our data could be even more valuable if we let them personalize it, particularly in the healthcare context. So if you say, hey, you can use my data, and I'll even let you know it's Andrew Yang, as long as you're giving me a percentage, then that could actually be very, very good for many, many people.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Yang. My name is Ruben Blum. I am a first-year grad student here in the School of Foreign Service, and I'm curious how you respond to the potential for inflationary effects of the Freedom Dividend. Even if the overall money supply isn't increasing, would not firms all across the board increase their prices to consumers and perhaps lower their wages to their workers?
So I dug into it, and most of the things that we consume are not getting more expensive. So think about in your own lives: media, electronics, clothing, automobiles, food for the most part, all relatively stable or getting better or getting cheaper. So what's been getting more expensive? Unfortunately, it's the really core things like education, housing, and healthcare. So if you put $1,000 a month into all of your hands, it's not like all of a sudden the local restaurant can like double their prices because you're still cost sensitive. You're not made of money, you just have $1,000. And so if I'm like, hey, like, what's the local restaurant here? Tombs. How much does a meal at Tombs cost? $15. So if you came back after I'm president in 2021, I'm like dividends for all, and then Tombs is like, hey, now we're $25. You wouldn't be like, okay, that's fine. You'd be like, what the heck happened here? Like you were $15 last week. And then you'd go to the other restaurant, and there's still competition for your business across every vertical. And so it's not like there'd be massive inflationary pressures in most respects. And the purchasing power would actually help you manage the inflation where it exists in things like education and healthcare, which I have plans to try and get those costs down. But there's no reason to think that Tombs and Verizon and everyone else is going to start like doubling their prices just because everyone has a little bit more money.
Okay, thank you. And which dorm were you in at Exeter?
I was at Peabody.
Okay.
What was the reputation of Peabody?
A lot of video games. May have been different, but I was in Ewald, so our reputation wasn't vastly superior.
Over here.
Hi, I'm Roland, senior in SFS. I'm wondering what's your view on the future of social impact investing? And I know the idea is that the market side is supposed to take more social responsibility, and a lot of banking and PE firms have set up that arm. So who do you think should take the lead in that field, and is this going to be sustainable and effective?
I'm a big fan of impact investing. I'm a big fan of double and triple bottom line. Right now, it's a very, very small proportion of overall investing, and it's very difficult to optimize for things, at the margins, where you have people who are driven by their financial incentives, and so you have a subset of people that can do very, very important work in the social investing space. I would love to see that work grow. But I do think that there are many, many problems that don't have a market-based solution. And it's hard for anyone to make a business out of it. So as one example, it's like, let's say I've scared you with the truckers a little bit. So you're like, oh, I'm going to try and do something about that. Like, what do you do with 500,000 displaced 50-year-old truckers? And if you try and create a business around that, it's very, very hard. Like, there's not really like a profit motivation. So we have to be honest about what the market can and can't do. There are things that the market is exceptional at. There are things that impact investing can solve for, but most of the major problems of this era, unfortunately, in my mind, are non-market-based problems. But I love it, and people who do good work, I mean, you're very excited about it.
Okay, thanks.
First of all, thank you for being here. My name is Diego Salinas. I'm from Puerto Rico, and I'm studying in the college government major. So we've talked about how the issue of technology and job displacement, but I wanted to take a second to focus in the environmental issues. So I know that the Green New Deal is something big right now, and from what I've seen, most of that plan is focusing on reducing or taxing U.S. emissions. But what worries me is that the U.S.'s emissions are only 15% of the world's emissions.
Yes.
So how do we drive down the global emissions, and what kind of policies help promote technology that can kind of be dispersed around the world to reduce those global emissions?
It's so true, man. I say the same thing. We're 15% of global emissions, so even if we were to go hog wild reducing emissions, we're probably just slowing the rate incrementally. And so I'd be for rejoining the Paris Accords, and I'd love to try and export more sustainable technology to other societies, but right now, a lot of people are just oriented towards economic growth at any cost, and if cheap, dirty energy is their path there, then they'll be attracted to that. So I have a relatively dark view on this, shocking, but I have a relatively dark view on the path of climate change, where we need to start preparing for the worst effects, and we should even start considering geoengineering ways to try and lower the temperature rise, because at this point, as you say, we control about 1/6 of the emissions. And so even if we were incredibly responsible, which we are not right now, it would still end up only slowing the rate incrementally.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that for a sec? On the policy side of this, how do we think about making those technologies more global public goods?
That'd be ideal. You just go around and start giving them away. Just say, hey, guess what? Solar panels, they're yours. I mean, that would have to be the move if you were legitimately going to try and bring down emissions. I also think we need to invest in large-scale carbon capture technologies. We need to be doing much more. And this is going to sound far out, but I think we should be sending mirrored satellites up that just like expand giant mirrors to like deflect some of the sunlight. That would actually work to slow glacier melt and some other things, and the penguins would get some shade. But we legitimately should start like making moves like that are reversible. It's like it's not permanent. Like, oh, like we don't like the way this worked. But just saying like, hey, we're gonna like slow emissions, it's a loser over time.
So, sorry, a quick follow-up. Would you support like, what do you call that? Subsidizing research and development on technology?
Oh yeah, I would go huge. I love that stuff. My father has 69 U.S. patents. It's like I love technological progress if we can start solving some of these problems.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Javier. I'm a sophomore in the college, and I'm from Puerto Rico. And I always see, like, come election time, presidents or presidential hopefuls go to Puerto Rico, get some money, and leave. And the policy is never consistent. Like, Democrats or Republicans, none of them really, long-term help the island. What would be, like, your plans for helping the fiscal crisis and the debt crisis in the island?
Yeah, I think it's deeply immoral what we've done in Puerto Rico. And one of the things I've said is that if Puerto Ricans looked like Swedes, this would be a very different picture. That I think our treatment of Puerto Rico is tragically awful. So I would forgive the debt because it makes no sense to advantage hedge funds over the people of Puerto Rico. I would grant Puerto Rico self-determination. If Puerto Ricans want to be a state, we should make them a state. I would make rebuilding Puerto Rico a national priority. I got married in Puerto Rico. I have many Puerto Rican friends, and I also celebrated my 40th birthday there. Like, I had my, my first vacation with my now wife there. So I love Puerto Rico, and I want to make it whole. Puerto Rico has lost, I believe, 1.2 million people after the hurricane, and it's going to be really difficult to rebuild it, but we just don't have a choice. I mean, there's still millions of Americans there, and many of them are still struggling. So I will tell you, like, the fact that you think politicians just come to Puerto Rico, get some money, get some photo ops, and leave, we have to undo that. I want to go all in. I'm going to vacation in Puerto Rico myself as president and say everyone should just vacation in Puerto Rico as an act of patriotism. It's like you get to use dollars. It's as close as anything else. Why are we giving, like Bahamas our money? Like, screw that. Let's make Puerto Rico, like, if you don't visit Puerto Rico, you're a bad American. And then just like drive money there and make it, I mean, not to say tourism is the end all be all of their economy, but it is a big part of the economy. I mean, tourism and agriculture. It used to be pharma manufacturing until they got rid of the subsidies. So as you can tell, I'm into it, man. Like, 51st state, let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you.
One more question.
Sorry. Thank you very much for taking one more. My name is Danielle Pearl. I'm an alumna of the Master's Program in Democracy and Governance here from quite a few years ago. My question is, I currently work as a consultant for a federal agency, and I found your story about the reaction you were confronted with when you tried to raise these issues with policymakers to be very striking. Basically, a refusal to acknowledge or deal with the issue. So I'm curious, I guess on two dimensions, how do you get these very powerful companies on board with being taxed when they're not currently being taxed? And as you're proposing these very structurally oriented economic changes, do you see structural political changes that need to go along with that?
Yeah, so one of the things I say to CEOs is that this is very good for business, because if people have money to spend, it's going to come back to you. Yes, you're going to pay some taxes, but then your customers are going to get the money, and it's going to be good overall. Are there structural political changes that need to be made? I believe there are. You know, our system right now is designed to impede action, and unfortunately, we're at a point now where we need to make some pretty big moves. Like the goal has to be to try and make those moves and then hopefully let it coalesce. And so, I mean, I have a lot of structural changes that I'm for. One example is that we should have 18-year term limits for Supreme Court justices. It makes no sense to be like freaking out if an 80-year-old has a cold. Like that doesn't make any sense. There was a constitutional, like it was someone was talking about the Constitution. How if the Founding Fathers came back from the dead, they'd be like, you mean you haven't written any new stuff? Like we actually have to start trying to update the operating system of our government for this era. And it's very, very hard. There's partisan gridlock, there's massive dysfunction. But someone's benefiting from that dysfunction, and it's not the American people. So you have to try and galvanize the American people, reclaim our democracy in a meaningful way, and then make moves that we can agree on. And I want to suggest to you all, if I become president, then the Asian man who wants to give everyone money won the presidency on the backs of that idea. It's a very powerful idea. And then Democrats and progressives will say, I love giving people money. It's like pro-family, let's do it. And then Republicans will look at it and say, wait a minute, that's a massive wealth transfer to rural areas in red states. And am I really going to stand in the way of that? And we only need 51% of Congress to get on board. So then you make that move, and then hopefully you can start making other big moves, building upon a different sort of coalition.
Well, thank you. Andrew, I think we have heard from a lot of students. Let me ask you one final question, or maybe two. One, you have a group of young students here who are thinking about their careers next, who are thinking about the future, as you've laid out. And what's the bit of advice you would give to them?
That if you want to do something that is valuable to you, you're going to have to fight like mad for it. It's not going to be presented to you. It's not going to be readily apparent. You're going to have to earn it and fight for it and scratch and claw. And as soon as you come out of this place, even when you're in this place, people are going to try and take it away from you at every juncture. And if you want to hold on to it, then you're going to have to start developing that set of, like, hopefully a very small cadre of people that are like you. This is why I created Venture for America, because it's a very, very hard process to go through alone. But if you're willing to fight for it, I can guarantee you that you'll end up with the sort of career that you're actually proud of. And you'll also build different kinds of relationships because people will gravitate you just the same way the woman who asked about running for office. Everything I've done in my career, I've made whole new sets of friends because when you do something that's important to you, other people can sense it. So that's really it, is that you have to fight for it. It will not come to you at all easily.
One final one after this. The challenges that we're looking at in the world are fairly large. Climate change, jobs, the future of work. We're going to go into various careers. What can we do to keep those pieces in front of mind, even when you are in the jobs that you go into? What are the things that you can do to keep pushing for that?
Yeah, the tips I've given to people who are in that situation, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I have many friends who, become partners at various firms and like the rest of it. One is try and keep your cost structure down because it's very, very natural that as you make more money, you spend more money, you just buy fancier stuff, you live in fancier places, and the rest of it, take fancier vacations. And then it just ends up building up over time. And before you know it, you're actually very, very inflexible, like you can't do much. So one of the things that I did was like just try to keep my costs very, very low, and then it ended up freeing me up to be able to do different types of things. So just if you get a raise, like pretend you didn't get that raise, just sock it away, and then it ends up building into a fund that maybe will let you do something really interesting at some point. The second thing is trying to talk to people that are not in the same setting that you're in, because there really is a high level of institutionalization and groupthink that builds up. And so if you're talking to different kinds of people, it will keep you much more open and receptive to different kinds of paths and opportunities.
Andrew Yang.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, man. Thank you.